You know, been a lot of talk about Abraham Lincoln, but the president we need today is not Abraham Lincoln. The president we need today is Thomas Jefferson. He said that we needed a revolution every generation. Thomas Jefferson said you have to be ready in order to preserve the vitality of your liberty and your freedom, to defend it, not by overthrowing anything else except for what you've been holding in your head that may not be applicable anymore. We've gotten very lazy. We're many generations overdue for a revolution in our thinking. I'm not talking about blood and violence, although I'm afraid that's already happening. I'm talking about a revolution that's probably the hardest kind, the kind that takes place inside the human soul and the human mind. To be able to tear everything down, throw everything out, and start with a completely fresh piece of paper and say, okay, how do we solve this problem?
Can you talk to me a little bit? I mean, who are you?
Listen, this is not a plan that would make sense to anybody except God. You know, I gave up trying to figure that out a long time ago. I was born into a family deeply connected to the U.S. intelligence community. My mother had been a cryptanalyst at the Army Security Agency and NSA in World War II. Her work product went to the President Roosevelt and to Secretary of War Stinson and Cordell Hull at State. My father was an Air Force aviator who went to work for Martin Marietta on contracts for the CIA and the Air Force, namely the Titan III-C, which put up the CIA's Keyhole spy satellites. At age 19, when I was interning for LAPD, I was pulled into the chief's office because somebody discovered I had a Q clearance. I didn't know anything about it. I went home and asked Dad, and he said, yeah, because you're my son, and you know they have to do that because I might leave my briefcase open. But a Q was a secret compartmentalized clearance above top secret. I went through UCLA as a Republican who didn't like anything about the war in Vietnam, who didn't like anything about government, with this naive belief that, you know, you could get inside the system and change it from the inside. I became an LA policeman, worked in South Central Los Angeles in the jungle, and the CIA tried unofficially to recruit me into an operation where they were smuggling drugs into the country back in 1976-77, and I wouldn't get involved in that. You know, I thought, well, geez, this must be an isolated incident of corruption. This must be something that everybody's going to want to correct right away. Oh, my God. And, of course, that was a mistake. Basically, my life disintegrated because I was betrayed by a woman who worked for CIA, who was my fiancée. And when I said I wouldn't get involved in drugs, she disappeared and people started shooting at me. And then it was a matter of saving my life. And the tools which I acquired to save my life then, which were, you know, writing letters to congressmen, getting on the record, trying to get newspaper stories written. Those were survival skills, but it was also a part of learning how things worked. I was a map maker, if you will, a cartographer, going out to try and map how the world really worked as opposed to the way we were told it worked. And the map that we have made has proved so startlingly accurate over 10 years, whether they had to do with gold prices or geopolitical developments or economic events. The only thing that amazes me is the speed with which things are falling apart. And that message now is the single most important thing in my life. It's the only thing in my life. Well, except for rock and roll music, good music, playing with my dog and long walks on the beach. Rags, come here. Rags, come here. I first became focused on energy issues in late 2001, just maybe a month or two after 9/11. I was contacted by a geologist, a brilliant guy named Dale Allen Pfeiffer, who introduced me to the concept of peak oil and the basic issues about energy and helped me to realize that There was a great deal of evidence in 2001, not only that peak oil was very real, but that government agencies were acting and responding as if it was very real. All plastic is oil. Most paints, all pesticides are made from oil. Everything from toothpaste to toothbrushes is made from oil. There are 7 gallons of oil in every tire. There is nothing anywhere in any combination that will replace the edifice built by fossil fuels. Nothing. Well, peak oil is probably now very easy to explain, much easier than it was a long time ago. People have felt what $147 a barrel oil feels like. Essentially, peak oil is like, if you know what a bell curve is, goes up, comes down. Peak oil is the point of oil production when you're at the top of the bell curve. And essentially what that means is you've used up half of the resource. But in the case of oil or any other substance like that, no matter how much money you throw at it, you're never going to be able to increase oil production above where it was at peak. As of 2008, the International Energy Agency has admitted that there is a global 9% decline rate in oil production. That's the equivalent of about 8 million barrels a day. There is no way, having plucked all the low-hanging fruit and found the big reservoirs, that we're going to be able to offset a 9% decline rate. From a detective standpoint, if you're trying to assemble a case, the multidimensional aspects of a case, means, motive, opportunity, to understand what kind of force drives events. Peak oil was almost, with the stroke of like a diamond cutter's knife, the single piece which started to make everything resonate and make sense together. You will recall that when the Bush administration took office in January 2001, a National Energy Policy Development Group, the NEPDG, was formed and placed under the exclusive, private, absolute control of Vice President Dick Cheney. Its records were kept a secret. Its minutes were kept a secret. 7 pages were released as a result of 2 lawsuits. And it clearly shows that that task force was looking, saying, how much oil is there? Where is it? Who owns it? They knew that this was coming for a long time. It's been known that this event, this collapse, this crash was coming.
Who they were. We can't even get information as to who was involved and what they were doing.
First of all, if you think there might be oil someplace, then what you do is you go drill a test well. Then what you have to do is to take that one well in the center, and then you drill a series of appraisal wells around that well to determine where the oil field might go. You don't know how much oil you're going to get, how deep it is, what kind of oil it's going to be. There are many different grades of oils, a lot of which are more expensive to refine. So all of that has to do with how long it takes to make something produce. How much energy do you get back for how much energy you invested? When oil was seeping out of the ground in Pennsylvania, you got a return of, 200 to 1. When you have to go offshore to deep water, drilling in 15,000 feet of water, and your first well costs $150 million to build, all that's energy that's being invested to get energy. And the moment you start burning more energy to get a barrel of oil out of the ground, then it's worth, forget about it. The world's been thoroughly explored over the last 120 years. There's no new major oil finds left. As a matter of fact, no field the size of Ghawar, the largest field in Saudi Arabia, has ever been discovered since. Saudi Arabia has 25% of the known oil reserves on the planet. 25%. Why, if Saudi Arabia has all these untapped reserves onshore, are they moving heavily into offshore drilling? Now, if it's 5, 10, 50 times more expensive to drill offshore than on land, doesn't that tell you that Saudi Arabia knows they've got no more oil to find? It's axiomatic that if Saudi Arabia has passed its peak and is in decline, the whole planet is, just because of the size of the reserves that are there. Iraq is oil that's not only accessible, it's right close to the Persian Gulf, which means it's a short distance to ships. They can put the pipelines, they can get that into the global supply stream as everything else declines. And Iraq was all about the oil. You know, a lot of people have admitted that, and like, duh. 11 days after 9/11, when there was no clear evidence that Saddam Hussein had anything to do with 9/11, of course he didn't, that the plans were started to invade Iraq, of course. That was the objective. Get control of that oil. Because Saddam Hussein had been talking about pricing his oil in euros, taking it away from the dollar. We got in there, we restructured everything, we put in a friendly government using the US dollar, and we assured the oil companies their quote-unquote fair access and fair share of Iraqi oil.
International oil companies into Iraqi oil fields.
We have no intention of leaving Iraq. We're never going to leave Iraq. Going back to 2004, we started building the largest, most permanent military bases, 3 of them in the world, plus the largest embassy compound that's ever been built. We built an embassy compound in Baghdad that's bigger than Vatican City. That's not a temporary deal. Nobody's going to take that oil, but we are sitting on it. But there is not enough oil in Iraq to change anything. Iraq probably has around 90 billion barrels of recoverable oil. That sounds like a lot of oil. But when you consider that in 2008, the world was consuming 85 million barrels a day, that means 1 billion barrels of oil only lasts for about 11 and a half days, so that ain't that much oil.
That's only the first of the good things that will come to Iraq, thanks to oil.
They knew exactly what was coming. That's what's in the National Energy Policy Development Group report that's been classified, because if that report were declassified, we would be building scaffolds to hang Dick Cheney and everybody in that administration tomorrow. Let's assume, just for the sake of discussion, that there's 600 billion barrels in the Arctic. First of all, it happens to be under the polar ice cap. That's a problem. The polar ice cap happens to be on, what, 10, 15,000 feet of water. The problem with the polar ice cap is it floats, it moves. So you can't drill a well on Tuesday and expect it to be in the same place on Thursday. That's why a lot of conservative think tanks and oil companies are cheering the melting of the polar ice caps.
Developing this tiny section of Anwar will eventually yield up to 1 million.
If there is oil in Anwar, there's no more than about a 6-month supply for the entire United States. There are no pipelines across 1,000 miles of tundra that's melting due to global warming, which means you can't sink pipes to support a pipeline in tundra that's turned to mud. There's no tanker routes. The wells aren't drilled, and yet we are spending our future as if that oil is there. We got to drop all this lying right now. If we don't need transparency about anything other than about how much oil is really left, because we don't know. Oil is a commodity, it's an asset. You make loans based upon what's in the ground. So you have all these accounting terms. Possible reserves, proven reserves, ultimately recoverable reserves, verified reserves, estimated, but actual reserve estimates are state secrets. The Saudis don't dare announce that they've passed their peak of oil production. Why? They have a very restive population that have been sold in expectation of a rising standard of living, and the moment Saudi Arabia acknowledges its past peak, it may well have a revolution. Now, what happens if there's a revolution in Saudi Arabia with 25% of the world's known oil? Where's that oil going to get replaced from? It can't be. Very complex problem. It's a very complex situation.
Just start working now, otherwise we won't have time. We're going to be out of oil within a few years.
In doing this sort of pulling archival footage for this film, I found at least 10 examples of people in the late 70s talking about this is the end of oil. This is like end of a way of life. We're hitting a new era.
This situation is destined to continue.
People look at that footage and I think that they can feel that it's somewhat alarmist, given that we were able to continue our way of life for another 30, 35 years. Do you see any parallels between that time and now?
The 70s was really a critical decade. In the 70s, Marion King Hubbard, the original prophet of peak oil, in late 1949, he did the math. It said U.S. domestic oil production will peak in 1970. So that's not some feat of Nostradamus communicating with some entity. It's math, it's science, it's simple. But in the 70s, M. King Hubbard testified before Congress. That was 1974. In 1976, President Jimmy Carter said, man, we cannot use as much energy as we have been using.
To use energy more efficiently.
That's when solar panels went up. That's when he started. He knew. They have known in Washington. I have published on my website, as have others, declassified CIA documents from 1976 showing that CIA was perfectly aware of peak oil. In those days, of course, when the situation appeared to be normal, when people had jobs, they had vacations, they had credit cards, they had credit lines, everybody's talking about growth, 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 buy, spend, consume, consume, and everything seemed to be working. Yeah, we were called alarmists. We don't live in that world anymore.
Americans were on the way to owning millions of cars.
800 million internal combustion powered vehicles on the planet. They all run on oil. It takes uncounted barrels of oil to make those cars and engines in the first place. And you cannot plug any new technology into an internal combustion powered engine. With 7 gallons of oil in every tire, nobody will ever make 800 million new internal combustion anything because there ain't going to be enough oil. Ethanol is an absolute joke. First of all, a very brilliant scientist, David Pimentel, took the concept of net energy. How much energy do you invest versus how much do you get in return? And he concluded about a decade ago, I guess, that it takes more energy to make ethanol than you get from burning it, which is absolute stupidity. Because you drive the oil-powered machines, et cetera, you irrigate, you use the fertilizers, you're burning all that oil and natural gas to grow it. Then you make steam, which is more hydrocarbon energy, you add more chemicals, and you come up with ethanol, which you can put in a car. Now, the Bush administration had announced a goal of having 15% of all fuel in the United States made from ethanol, I think by the year 2015. They forgot to tell you that that would take all the arable land used to grow corn to do it. Canadian tar sands is an oil. It is a very, very thick, sticky, obnoxious substance that's mixed in with sand at levels 200, 300, 400, 500 feet in layers beneath the soil. This is in Alberta. And they literally strip mine thousands of tons a day. They put them in these huge oil-powered dump trucks and drive them to a place where they then wash the sand. They take millions and billions of gallons of fresh water, which we're running out of everywhere, and they boil it by burning natural gas. There is not a possibility anywhere that Canadian tar sands production will exceed maybe 3.5 million barrels a day. The first thing that the uneducated mind that's in denial says, well, what about hydrogen? Can't we make electric cars? And I have to bring them back to the fact that there's 7 gallons of oil in every tire, that there are thousands of gallons of oil in every car, in the plastics, the paints, the resins, everything, all of that's made by oil, the oil that's used to manufacture the car and ship it around to heat the metals, et cetera, et cetera. There will never be 800 million electric-powered vehicles, and electricity is not an energy source. Electricity is generated by burning or using some other kind of energy.
Today, freedom and power are woven together. The invisible battalions of electric power turn out autos and airplanes.
It's clear that electricity is the key to industrial civilization in that it powers our refrigeration. It runs the water pumps that pump water out of the New York subway system every day. It allows us to commute electronically, charge our cell phone batteries, preserve food, run operating rooms, etc. The subject of alternative energies. There is no such thing as clean coal, and there never, ever will be. Why? Carbon sequestration is enormously expensive. What it says is essentially is you capture the CO2 and any other greenhouse gases emitted. In the burning of the coal, you exert enormous amounts of energy to compress it, then you move it over enormously long distances and you pump it into some airtight chamber in the ground where somebody will figure out with technology what to do with the greenhouse gas in 10 or 15,000 years. Nuclear process requires something like 10 to 13 years of incubation to get the permitting done, all the regulations satisfied, and the construction of nuclear power plants is one of the most energy-intensive processes in the world. The steel, the lead containment, the enrichment of uranium is a horribly intensive process. You just don't throw a rock of uranium in and start making nuclear energy. Can't do that. The first and obvious problem with tidal energy is that it has to be generated or collected near a coastline. Salt water is extremely corrosive. There's an enormous net energy cost in manufacturing the machines. There are only two alternative energies which can really have an immediate impact, an immediate benefit. Now, the problem with plans like enormous wind farms in Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, the fundamental law with electricity is that it's drawn off right where it's used first. Yes, you can transmit electricity over long distances, but people don't think about the energy that goes into transformers and how much copper is in power lines and all the maintenance that has to go to that grid. So when you see really ridiculous commercials that say we could have a solar array 96 miles in the desert, they don't even think about the fact that that electricity is going to get used in California before it goes anyplace else.
Just, you know, if you saw this movie and you didn't know who you were, and you were just curious what your credentials are in terms of understanding this information.
I have a bachelor's degree in political science with honors from UCLA, 1973. Graduate of the Los Angeles Police Academy, valedictorian. Class of 1173, was sent to do a DEA narcotics enforcement school by LAPD. I have 30 years of experience as an investigative journalist. I've broken major scandals that have had national impact. Of course, I got to know many members of Congress. I'd been trying to testify for a long time, and actually I have never testified in Congress. I did, at the request of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, submit written testimony, but after they read the written testimony that I was going to submit, I never got called to testify. I've written 2 books, one of which is in the Harvard Business School library. I've lectured at universities all over the country and in many countries. People wonder, you know, how this guy with a bachelor's degree from UCLA came to know all this shit. Well, this comes from 30 years of learning how to scan mainstream media and read it. A way of finding stories from around the world that tell you all the things that are really going on, that are not played on the headlines, but they're the kind of stories that people who really make decisions know how to look for. And then how to connect them, how to place the dots close enough together so that they can be connected. The soil is the place from which all plant matter gets its nutrients. And if you keep sucking the nutrients out, the soil is useless. For all of history, the way the soil was replenished and the nutrients were returned in some measure to the soil was that plant matter was allowed to decay, to compost, to restock the soil. That's why crop rotation is so important. You may have one crop of celery which will suck certain chemicals out of the soil. Another crop, wheat or something else, may return those same chemicals to the soil. So the soil maintains a balance. It's kind of sad because we as a species have become so disconnected from the earth. We don't have any real contact with the earth. We don't have any sense of its functions, its feel, its nature, its seasons, its timing. First of all, the topsoil on which food is grown now is nothing more than a sponge onto which we pour chemicals that we get from oil and natural gas. And without those chemicals, the soil has been turned into a junkie. The soil is worthless. So when you plant a crop now, what happens is you drive an oil-powered machine, drives along, and it plows. Then you drive another oil-powered machine, and it drives along, and it plants. And then you irrigate. Well, how do you irrigate? Well, that water is pumped by pumps that are powered by electricity. Where does that electricity come from? In the United States, it's either coal or natural gas. So next thing you do is come along and you fertilize it. All commercial fertilizers are made from ammonia, and the feedstock for ammonia is natural gas. So you have ammonium nitrate fertilizers that are then sprayed on by another oil-powered vehicle. Then the crop dusters come along that are powered by oil that spray pesticides that are all made from petroleum. Then when it's time to harvest the food, what do? You drive another oil-powered machine and you harvest it. You use another oil-powered machine to drive it to a place where it's processed. Then you wrap it up in plastic, which is oil, and you put it in another oil-powered machine, and you drive it X number of miles to a food distribution warehouse, an oil-powered machine to your supermarket. The way food is grown, produced, and moved around the world today, it's an enormous waste of hydrocarbon energy, which doesn't make sense. Why do we have strawberries from Chile? Why do we have spinach from China? Why do we ship anchovies halfway around the world to be packaged in tin cans and, you know? There are 10 calories of hydrocarbon energy in every calorie of food consumed in the industrialized world. Three times in my life, I tried to walk away from, forget about the things that I had seen that were so out of whack, that were so crazy, that were so wrong. You know, and that's what many people urged me to do. But what inevitably happened every time I tried to walk away from this path that I walked was that everything else in my life would be taken away from me, so that this path was the only thing left. I had no other choice. And yeah, anger and resentment do build up, especially when you see and document as much corruption, as much dishonesty, as much illegality, as much murder, as much betrayal as I have from people who pretend to be otherwise. And I reached a point, it was about 1993, when I first became involved or learned of the murder of Marine Colonel Jim Sabo at El Toro Marine Air Station. He was the chief of Air Ops, and he had caught CIA C-130s flying 2,000 and 3,000 kilos of cocaine onto his base, and he was suicided. I crossed my own Rubicon at that point. There was no turning back for me. And I knew that wherever this path was going to go, I had to follow it. In the 80s, because I'd had some skill as a writer, I started freelance writing. I got published a few times. I realized that I could be a writer. I wrote about 109 mysterious deaths or suicides in the US military in a very short period of time, and I found that most of those were connected to covert operations in one way or another. The next real evolution came in 1996 after my confrontation with the CIA director Deutsch, John Deutsch, at Locke High School. You know, I remember standing up saying something like, You know, I am a former Los Angeles Police narcotics detective. I worked South Central Los Angeles, and I can tell you, Director Deutsch, emphatically and without equivocation, that the agency has dealt drugs in this country for a long time, and the room exploded. I had been saying that CIA was dealing drugs for 18 years. I mean, I'd been shot at for it, I'd been forced out of LAPD, I'd been trashed, I'd been called crazy.
If in the course of the IG's investigations and Fred Hitz's work, you come across evidence of severely criminal activity, will you tell the American people the truth?
We will bring the people to justice and make them accountable.
Like so often when they promise justice, there isn't any. It was whittled and tweetered down. There were some very mysterious deaths involved. Congressman Julian Dixon, who was at that meeting, had a very sudden heart attack, which led to the publishing of the first issue of my newsletter in May of 1998, From the Wilderness. I sat down and wrote a few pages out, like 8 pages, I think. I mailed it to 68 names. And over the next 8.5 years, From the Wilderness grew to have as many as 60 members of Congress as subscribers, professors at universities around the world, government officials. One of my first exposés after CIA and drugs was that I proved CNN was absolutely lying in something called the Tailwind Scandal of 1998, where CNN had correctly reported, their producer April Oliver had reported that CIA had used sarin gas in Laos during the Vietnam War, and Henry Kissinger authorized it.
4 different A-1 pilots who dropped the gas.
In spite of what the Pentagon said. Yes.
CNN, rolled over. Henry Kissinger called. Oliver was fired. Pat Tillman series that I broke in my newsletter, all 7 parts, that was what broke the Pat Tillman expose that brought down 9 officers or got them disciplined.
Tillman, the government violated its most basic responsibility.
But my economic predictions then, we had it so right.
Problems are several-fold behind the economic crash that is coming that will be nothing like we have ever seen before.
In 2006, we said, get out of debt right now. Check your mortgage carefully, especially if you have an arm. Get into gold. Reduce debt as much as possible. Stay away from any kind of financing and heavy credit card. We issued a whole series of warnings.
How many people have ever heard of the fact that they're trading pools of mortgage-backed securities, like mutual funds, but it's all mortgages? Those books are as cooked as the books on Enron.
But it was like 11, 12 days after we issued that economic alert, in the middle of running the Tillman series, that our offices were burglarized. All 7 computers smashed, and a whole chain of events took place up there, which actually worked out okay, because I needed to evolve, and I have since then. There was a period after so many years of deliberate attempts to sabotage my operations, 4 of which we connected in one way or another to the FBI. I published that I had retired. I said officially that I had retired. What I had, and at that point, given the way I felt, that was a pretty honest statement. I didn't know that I would bounce back, or that there was a third or a fourth wind to come inside of me. But that also is the image that I wanted out there, just to take the heat off me, at least until Bush and Cheney got out of the White House, because that's where the heat was coming from.
From them personally, I mean, or from their administration, or from the people that ran the CIA, that ran the FBI, who was that pressure coming from?
I have absolutely no doubt that Richard Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld took an intense personal interest in me and what my newsletter had published for all the years of the Bush administration. That's about as specific as I care to get. There was a guy named von Clausewitz who said that war is a continuation of politics by other means. Politics is a continuation of economics by other means. To understand all of this mess, you need to understand one term. It's a big financial term that's real simple to understand. It's called a derivative. A derivative is any financial instrument which is derived from the inherent value of something else that's tangible. In other words, an ear of corn has value. A barrel of oil has value. If you have a house and a mortgage, that's fine. When you start doing mortgage-backed securities, packaging and bundling, that's called a derivative. As of the start of the collapse, which let's peg at September of 2008, there were derivatives with a notional value, meaning that if you added up all the pieces of paper, were worth $700 trillion. In other words, if they all cashed out at once, you would need to have $700 trillion in cash, and of course there isn't that much money. So with all of these hedges and derivatives and puts and calls, those are all derivatives, and all these other things they do, all they cared about was making the minimum monthly payment on the credit card bill. In other words, to service the $700 trillion in notional value derivatives, they had to pay a certain amount of cash every month, and God forbid they should all come due. What's happening with all of these bailouts, which are now around 11 trillion if you add up all the US bailouts, they're chasing a $700 trillion derivatives bubble down the drain. The people who have run the monetary paradigm, the economic paradigm, since money was first invented, have wanted to mystify it and to make everybody believe that only some expert could understand the mumbo-jumbo of the priesthood of money. Three things only anybody needs to know about the way money works around the world today. One, fiat currency. What is money? If I were to take a bill out of my wallet, and I reach in my wallet and I pull out this bill, it's $20. Wow. Okay. Can I eat it? Can I roll it up and chew it? Do I get calories and vitamins? No, I don't. Can I crumple it up, throw it in my gas tank? Is the car gonna go anywhere? No, it's gonna clog the fuel injectors, maybe. This is only a symbol. This doesn't mean anything. It's fiat. It's created out of thin air because somebody turned on a printing press. That's all it is. Before the great growth of population, which occurred with the advent of oil, came this revolution in the monetary system as well. There was a time when the pound sterling actually meant a pound of sterling silver. There was only so much silver out of the ground. It was tangible. You couldn't print silver. It was something real. You cannot print any more money than there is energy to back it up. That simple. So we have fiat currency. Then we have something called fractional reserve banking. If you were to bring me in a $10 deposit, I could make $90 worth of loans based on just having that $10 in my drawer, because it's all calculated on the premise that not everybody's going to come in and want their cash all at once. That's called a run on the bank. So they have calculated the odds, much as Vegas odds makers do. And said, okay, well, you know, very little odds under normal conditions. When I lend now a total of $100 based on that $10 deposit, that's more money that I create out of thin air. Well, gee, that means that in order to pay off, whoever gets that money has to make more money still to feed in at the bottom to pay the bank so that the bank can create still more money. You know, I think it's probably pretty safe at this point in time with the collapse of the U.S. economy to say that pretty much everybody is understanding how compound interest works. The higher the interest rate on your credit card, for those people who had, 20, 25% cards, that means they're creating that much more money if they don't pay cash every month. What I have just described is a pyramid scheme. We live in an infinite growth paradigm, which requires growth forever. It's not that Bernie Madoff was a pyramid scheme or Stanford was a pyramid scheme. The whole economy is a pyramid scheme. The whole global economy cannot be sustained. It requires infinite growth. But infinite growth collides with finite energy. First law of thermodynamics, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. The second law, energy converts in only one direction, from usable to unusable. That's called the law of entropy. Things break down, and in every energy transaction, some energy is always lost. So you have finite energy, and you have a financial paradigm which demands infinite growth, and we are at the point of human history where the infinite growth paradigm collides with something that is more powerful than money is. By 2006, I knew that the collapse was very imminent, that there would be a major implosion of the U.S. economy. I actually missed it by about a year, maybe a little bit more. I thought it was going to happen sooner, but it happened. And now that it is happening, these pieces are falling exactly as if everything else we had written, said, done, all the peak oil activists, all the sustainability advocates, our map was proving deadly accurate. Things don't break up, they break down. When a government collapses, what happens? The mail stops getting delivered. Air traffic controllers don't get paid, so they don't go to work, which means planes don't fly. Bridges and highway inspections don't get made. Food and Drug Administration inspections don't get made. Maintenance is going to be defrayed. Law enforcement stops working. I mean, it's no secret now. You see the headlines every day. California's bankrupt, Michigan's bankrupt, Ohio's. They're shutting down services left and right. There are tent cities springing up all over the country. There are homeless, displaced people. A great many billionaires, who we would call the elites, a great many very, very wealthy people, are getting crashed, burned, and eaten alive. What you don't hear is the fact that all over the world, economies are collapsing much faster than the U.S. economy. Britain is an absolute basket case. There is a curtain of despair descending across Eastern Europe. There's a revolution underway in Greece. It's not riots, it's not civil unrest, it's a revolution. Drug violence right across the border in Mexico. This is all part of the collapse. Pakistan, Afghanistan, there's lots of violence. The people who have run the planet to this point and who are running the planet now are losing control. Have I ever been called a conspiracy theorist? Of course I've been called a conspiracy theorist. But I don't deal in conspiracy theory, I deal in conspiracy fact. You know, somebody once said to me a long time ago, and this was probably back in '84, "Climb down off the cross, asshole, we need the lumber." I am not a messiah. I am not responsible for saving anybody. The only person I'm responsible for saving is me. What I see now is the end of a paradigm that is as cataclysmic as the asteroid event that killed almost all the life on the Earth, and certainly the dinosaurs. Now, the dinosaurs were kings of their paradigm. And a paradigm is what you think about something before you think about it. Somebody talks about money, and you automatically accept without thinking that compound interest, fractional reserve banking, and fiat currency is okay, and we have to protect that, because if we don't protect that, it's going to be bad for us. If you know anything about Darwinism, basically what it said is that those species that had evolved or were able to adapt to changing circumstances were the ones that survived, and those that were not equipped or had become evolutionary dead ends were destined to die. Mike, you better be careful. It sounds like you're advocating social Darwinism. I'm not advocating social Darwinism. I am witnessing actual Darwinism. If you're in a camp with a bunch of campers and a bear attacks, you don't have to be faster than the bear. You only have to be faster than the slowest camper. There is one and only one graph image that I have used, and I would guess 60 to 70 lectures in 8 countries, and that's a graph of human population. And if one looks at that graph, what you see is human population roughly stable at around 1 billion people or so, maybe a little bit more, at around the time of Christ, and it stays pretty stable until we get to the bubonic. It starts to rise some as some primitive technology emerged, but then you get to the bubonic plague, there's a little dip. Then after the bubonic plague, you begin the start of what we would call the Renaissance and the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, the discovery of steam. The population starts to go like this. The introduction of coal, the population starts to go like this. But around 1900, around the turn of the 20th century, what you see as oil became ubiquitous was that the population went like this. And it goes up to 6.5 billion people. We may be at 7 billion people by the time anyone sees this interview. All of those people exist on this planet only because of oil. That's it. So it's axiomatic that if you take the oil away, the population must go away also. In all of science, in all of biology, there is no case where any population, be it bacteria in a petri dish or caribou in an Arctic island, runs into a set of favorable circumstances and goes to that point without an immediate crash down. It's a law. It's a law as fundamental as gravity. It's a law as fundamental as thermodynamics. And if one thinks about it, it might also be viewed as true of the stock market or the financial markets, which go like this. And when they go like this, they automatically go like this. That's the history of every bubble. I think it's a mistake to ask if people, and make all people the same as one entity, if they will understand it. I don't care if all people understand it. When you're faced with an overwhelming, life-threatening crisis, as in the Titanic being hit by an iceberg, and you happen to be aware before anybody else is that the ship is going to sink and there aren't enough lifeboats, and you know how to build lifeboats, and you tried to deal with that in however long the Titanic had before it went down, you're likely to run across 3 types of passenger on the Titanic. You'll run across a type that's basically deer in the headlights. Ship's been hit, what does that mean? What do I do? I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. Should I do that? I don't know. That's one group. There's another group that says, we get that the ship's gonna sink. We get that we're all gonna die unless we make some lifeboats and do it fast. Show us what to do. And then you have a third group that says, this is the Titanic. It's absolutely unsinkable, unfucking sinkable. And so we're going back to the bar for a drink, and all you doomsday sayers can actually just take a hike. Now, if you're the one who knows how to build lifeboats, which group of people are you gonna help? Certain things are inevitable right now. FDIC insolvency, I will tell you, is coming. Insolvency of the Federal Reserve is coming. Federal Reserve can go bankrupt. T-bill defaults. We're looking at major bankruptcies, starvation, dislocation. All these things are already on the way. Everything is going to break down differently in different places. The best that I can do is give you some ideas of some markers that are going to come. The bumpy plateau has been described by peak oil activists and researchers for many, many years, and it's actually happening. Basically, you come up the growth curve of oil prices, and the oil prices go up until you start running out of oil, then what happens is you have to destroy demand, which is what's happening with this collapse. Demand gets destroyed, the price of oil drops. But as you start a recovery, you start back up again and you collide again with the finite oil and the rising energy prices, which shuts everything down again. This is the bumpy plateau. I think it's fairly certain that the mortal blow to human industrialized civilization will happen when oil prices spike again and nobody can afford to buy that oil, and everything will just shut down. The collapse must happen fast in order to leave infrastructure standing. We've all heard the stories about infrastructure, you know, the sewers and the bridges and the roads and all that. Well, the point is that as economic collapse continues or accelerates, those structures will fall into more and more disrepair. There's not going to be any money or anything running to fix those. So what you want to have is the change to a new paradigm, getting the old one out of the way, while there's still infrastructure left to start building something new. We have to survive the transition phase of human civilization, which I anticipate could last anywhere between 20 years, and oh my God, would that be fast and hard, you know, to 50 years or 100 years before some kind of stable civilization starts to emerge. You need to survive the transition phase. So don't panic, don't freak out. Use your heads, analyze your local situation where you live. Don't worry about rebuilding sewers. You're going to be able to get water for a few years. People say there's either oil or no oil. There's either food or no food. And people say, well, we're going to have food in the supermarkets on Tuesday and we're never going to see it again. That's not the way it's going to happen. As things break down, we will see specific shortages in specific areas for periods of days before it gets to the point where there's nothing left. So what you need to prepare for is not the end result, but you need to prepare to survive the transition. You know, people say, okay, I'm going to run for the hills. I'm going to go build a cabin. I'm going to buy 10 million cans of baked beans. Well, they're probably going to be the first to die. Number one, it's too late. If you don't know how to live off the land, and if you're not already on the land right now, don't even try to go, because you're going to fail miserably, and you might be shot by the people who got there ahead of you.
You know, the one factor that you're not including in some of this is just sort of discounting human ingenuity or our ability to sort of problem solve.
Because my father was an Air Force aviator, combat veteran, he was very much trained in a military style of decision-making and analysis where it's motivated by life and death decisions, where you are trained how to think critically and respond critically in response to emergency. So I was trained at an early age in the skill of critical thinking. And maybe I have a gift for it too. I believe there are some people who have a gift for critical thinking. And my own experience on the streets in South Central Los Angeles as a cop, there were quick decisions, sometimes decisions which changed people's lives or could end people's lives. And it gave me an ability to respond and think, to separate the ice cream from the bullshit. Probably one of the biggest impediments I removed to critical thinking was I stopped taking mainstream media seriously a long time ago.
But we were talking about human ingenuity.
No amount of technology and no amount of human ingenuity can possibly overturn the laws of physics, the laws which govern this planet. Those are intractable, immutable, real, and science has never been able to do that. Man's great arrogance, I believe, and one for which he's paying a price now, is to believe that mankind really could become God and even turn over and upset and revoke somehow the laws of the universe. I am a great advocate of buying and owning physical gold, not paper gold. You buy gold, you own it. When hyperinflation occurs after deflation here and all these trillions of dollars come back and we are wheeling wheelbarrows of $1,000 bills to buy a loaf of bread, the only thing people will accept for goods is going to be gold. Do whatever you can to re-insulate your house if you need to. If you have a house, if you have soil, you immediately get it off petrochemicals and start learning how to restore it. What I do in the yard where I'm renting, I'm mixing barbecue and wood ash, and then I go out and pee on everything, because then you get the root elements of ammonium nitrate that starts to bring the soil back. If you are dependent upon a cell phone, get a landline. All of the telecommunications companies that operate the satellites, the cell towers, the fiber optic cables, and all this stuff that makes your wonderful cell phone work are cutting back on maintenance as the stock market collapses, and we're going to see failures in cell phone service. A landline is a redundancy that can help you. Get books on first aid and holistic medicine. Moderate fresh water supply. The reasonable amount of food storage. You can't store enough to live on. What you need to store is seeds. Seeds that are not manufactured by Monsanto, that are not Franken seeds, that only work one time you plant them and then you gotta go buy more. You get good, organic, whole seeds and you store them. That could be a great currency in the future. Unlike the Great Depression, this is a vastly different scenario. We do not have infinite resources left to be tapped. We don't have lots of land. We're at peak everything, all the commodities, everything else. And what they had in the 1930s that my grandparents told me about was the ability to grow food right where they live. And local food production is perhaps the most fundamental key to human survival in the collapse of industrialized civilization. We've had examples of what happens when oil disappears and how civilizations respond and what works and what doesn't. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and there were two nations that were absolutely and totally dependent upon Soviet oil for their survival because they had none, Cuba and North Korea. And what they did in response to that was completely opposite, and the proof, as they say, was in the pudding. North Korea was a rigid, hierarchical, top-down, Soviet-style, bureaucratic regime where everything came from the central government, they managed everything, and North Korea starved. I mean, it was, in human terms, the suffering was amazing. All of a sudden, there's no oil, there's no natural gas, there's no fertilizer, cars don't run, trains don't run. You get to a point where you can run trains on some day and generate electricity on others, but you can't do both at the same time. But the Cuban government reverted to one of the purest forms of capitalism. It said, everybody start restoring the soil and grow food. You will grow food where you live. If you find any piece of arable land that's not being used, you occupy it and you start farming it and you start growing food right now. The Cuban government did everything it could to liberate local food growing. And what happened was after a very tough period, the Cuban people were eating better than they had ever eaten because they were free of this whole agribiz, Franken food nightmare. Everything was organic. And you had every square inch in Havana that had soil on rooftops or in flower boxes was growing food. And there was a degree of sustainability. Everything became organic. And all you had to do was separate the people from the way money worked and top-down control. Explain to them, you grow it where you eat it and you're going to make it. And Cuba survived and thrived. And that's the essence of where everything is going to. In the new human paradigm, everything will be local. Jack London was one of my favorite writers and wrote about animals a lot. One thing you know about animals is that they all want to go home when they know that they're going to face death. They don't want to be in their tribe or their pack or whatever it is. They want to be on familiar ground. It's a natural animal instinct. In Dubai, the economic crash has hit so hard that Indians who were living and working in Dubai lost their jobs, and they just drove to the Dubai airport and abandoned their cars. And there was a story talking about all the cars that were abandoned as these Indians caught a one-way ticket home to go home. And it's happening in Britain too. You have lots of Poles and Eastern Europeans who were the latecomers into EU fleeing Britain to go home. Now, in some areas, and certainly in the Southern California basin with 13, 14 million people and a 4-day food supply, it's clear that people are going to migrate out of this area because it's not sustainable. We get most of our water from Northern California. That's a problem. We get a lot of our electricity from Hoover Dam out in Las Vegas. Phoenix, for God's sake, Las Vegas. Those people have to worry about where to go, and community is what will save us. You're going to have to do it in conjunction with your neighbors and your family and the people around you. You will fail as a rugged individual. You will survive as a member of a tribe or a family. I have emotion about this. I'm losing it. We have waited for so long for somebody to listen to us. When the mainstream press and the government says nobody could have predicted this, they're lying through their fucking teeth. We all saw exactly what was going to happen and how it was going to happen, and remarkably, when it was going to happen. None of us expected the collapse to be as severe as it's proving to be or as fast as it's proving to be. But we've been screaming for years, and we've been watching everything we said come to pass, and we have felt so angry. I haven't lost emotional connection to it. What I have learned to do over the course of my life is to balance the horror with love, with play, with making people smile. I take my dog out for a walk, and we count how many smiles we can inflict in the course of one walk. I walk through downtown Culver City, and I usually come home, with saying, oh, that was 23 smiles we created today. And for some reason at this moment in time, that's a very precious little treat for me. There was a psychiatrist, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who talked about the 5 stages of grief. And when you're hit with an overwhelming life-changing situation. The first is denial. This can't possibly happen. It's not true. No, it's not happening. And you stay in denial and you fight to stay in denial. Then comes anger. I really believe that mankind is now entering just barely. It has just barely crossed the threshold of the anger phase. We have to get through the anger phase, and how we get through that anger phase is going to be critical. The way we're going under current government and monetary rule, the only kind of anger that's going to be produced is the destructive kind, born of absolute frustration and bitterness, that nothing that's being sold to us as being a solution is making us feel any goddamn better. Then, of course, after that, we have the bargaining. Well, the bargaining is kind of going on now, too. Maybe I could have done something different. Well, maybe I should have thought of that. Maybe if I do this now, it won't be different. Then you go through the bargaining and you finally get to a place of depression where it's really starting to sink in. And these are all emotional stages that one goes through, whether they're an individual or a culture or a civilization. And the final stage is acceptance. And it's really only when people reach the point of acceptance that you can find those people who are like part of the ones on the Titanic saying, okay, show us how to build a lifeboat.
You know, there's different ways to look at, you can find stories that support arguments that you want to make just because there's different authors that sort of support your worldview and there's other ones that don't. Is it possible to sort of create a reality based on picking news stories that support your worldview?
I don't do debates anymore. And the reason why I don't do debates anymore is because I don't have to. At some point, you have to acknowledge the fact that what I've been writing about and what I've been saying is actually happening all around us. So why do I need to debate anything? Why does the peak oil movement, why does the sustainability movement need to debate anything? Everything that we said was going to happen is taking place right now. Every aspect of human existence is on the table.
As far as political parties go, they're all anachronisms. They're all products of centuries gone by.
The human race now is only going to be concerned not with an ideology, but what allows them to survive. Capitalism, socialism, and communism are all terms that need to be tossed in the trash can immediately because all of them were created on the assumption of infinite resources. Not one of those ideologies that are now dead dinosaurs, archaic fossils, and no longer relevant to our way of life, not one of them recognizes that there must be a balance between growth and the resources and the planet. So forget the idea that you can have as much as you want, because until mankind surrenders to the fact that it lives on a finite planet and it must have balance with that planet, with the planet's resources, with the animal life and all the other life, there can be no happiness for anything. Anything. It's all about getting balance back. And who sold me the idea that it was my destiny to grow? Nothing grows forever. There's no such thing as infinite growth. It's not possible. Look around at everything you see around you that's living. There is a cycle. Birth, growth, maturation, decline, and death. The challenge being faced by the human race now is either evolve or perish, either grow up or die. God doesn't care. God's not going to play babysitter for us. The challenge is either you grow up and mature, change your minds in the way you think, or you're going to perish. Everything's on the table now. God is on the table. Every religion in the world is on the table now. They'll all be measured as standards by this is reality and this is what the religion says. And every religion in the world is going to be under huge microscope. This is going to be the greatest age of evolution in human thinking that's ever taken place. You walk towards your fear, you embrace your fear, you don't try to hedge it. That a part of real living as a human being, as a spiritual being, is to embrace and encompass your fear, your love, and not run away from anything, because that's the life experience. And it's in that richness that I think we find the most beautiful art, the most beautiful music. We find the richness of what the human soul can offer. And I see all that richness buried under such bullshit.
Can you talk about your own spirituality? You know, you talk about a lot of different religions. How do you define your own spirituality?
I quote a Christian Saint Timothy, and I find it to be true what he said, that the love of money is the root of all evil. That's the end result of my spiritual, intellectual quest. It is the end, it is the fundamental truth that I have verified through 3 decades of empirical, investigative, legal, academic research. trying to answer some fundamental questions about human existence and why we behave the way we do, why we think the way we do, why we act the way we do. The love of money is the root of all evil, and it is the love of money which has the potential to exterminate, to render extinct the entire human race. All right, so here we have this likable, sincere guy in the White House. And he is as imprisoned as we all are. I need to cut. I'm just having a real powerful wave of emotion right now because a whole new realization is opening to me about what I'm actually saying, and this is some serious fucking shit, so I gotta get my head around it for a second. Fuck. Okay, I'm ready. He's a prisoner of government, he's a prisoner of politics, he's a prisoner of economics, he's a prisoner of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, he's a prisoner of the Federal Reserve, he's a prisoner of a governmental system that's archaic and not quickly responsive. So we should not make the success or failure of human civilization rest on his shoulders. The only thing in the world that you and I can possibly change to give ourselves a chance of survival and to give our children a chance at some kind of human civilized life is our minds. You have to believe, not wish, not hope, not pray, not beg. You just have to believe that there's a way out of it, and you're going to find it. This is perhaps the greatest part of the American character, is when we get pissed off and we put our minds to something and we clearly understand what needs to be done and we believe in it, we really can change things. I plan on living joyfully and happily for the rest of my life. A free man. Shit. How can you possibly say there's no hope? Just change your mind and see what we see. Stop thinking like dinosaurs.
So do you feel that the work that you do, you're just going to do it regardless of what the possible consequences are? It just would be so much easier to have walked away.
If there was a German in 1932-33 who had the foresight to look ahead and to see what the inevitable end result of the Third Reich would be, if there was somebody who had seen that coming, do you honestly think that they could in good conscience turn around and walk away from it and pretend it wasn't there? When every passing day, from the first election of Adolf Hitler as chancellor in 1933 to Kristallnacht, to the Night of the Long Knives, to Anschluss, the occupation of Austria, to Sudetenland, Poland, as all of those things happened that were right on the map, how do you think that person would have felt? Do you think that person could have walked away? We are all collectively, as a species, responsible for what may be the greatest preventable Holocaust in the history of planet Earth, our own suicide. How do you walk away from that? How do you sleep at night? Who is anybody? Who are you to tell me it would have been easier to walk away? You weren't in my skin. It was never easier for me to walk away, because to walk away would have meant to compromise. To walk away would have meant selling out. You know, I'm still a guy who 30 years ago approached his government as a citizen asking for redress of grievance. I cut the CIA deal in drugs. It's wrong. Somebody needs to talk about this. And I'm still that same guy. I'm still the 27-year-old about to be promoted perfect record, perfect rating report, LAPD, dedicated, clean LAPD cop. He's still alive in me, and he very much wants some answers. There is a legend or a fable that really speaks to my life about the 100th monkey. Long time ago, in the late 40s, early 50s, when atom bombs and H-bombs were in vogue with above-ground testing, we set off an atom bomb on an atoll in the Pacific. And then we waited a number of years because we wanted to answer questions like, gee, how soon after we nuked something would it be possible to get any kind of life started again? So they went back to this island and they decided to repopulate it with monkeys. And the monkeys ate coconuts. Everything was pretty healthy except for the fact that the husks of the coconuts were slightly radioactive. So the scientists took 10 monkeys or so and taught them to wash the coconuts in the fresh water stream on the island before they cracked them open and turned the whole thing loose to see what would happen. Well, you know, pretty soon maybe 12 monkeys out of a population of 10,000 were washing their coconuts, and then 20, and then 47. But a funny thing happened. As soon as the 100th monkey started washing his coconut husk, all 10,000 started washing simultaneously. And I guess one way that I have always looked at my life, especially since I clearly understood what this issue was in late 2001, is this is my quest for the 100th monkey.